We have visual of 3 unidentified aerial systems hovering like 800 feet above the ship.
David Grusch said that he had talked to a lot of people who have told him that we had crashed alien spaceships and even bodies. And when I come along and I say that video doesn't show UFO, they think that as being an attack on their entire fabric of their reality.
Someone has to lie here, or there is something there. Mick West is a science writer and investigative skeptic, known for digging into conspiracy theories, misinformation, and unusual claims, especially when it comes to UFOs and UAPs. Why would they keep it secret? What is their incentive to...
There are secrets in the government, and there are probably some secrets that the president doesn't know about. How do we know that there are secret programs about aliens? We don't. We just know that people have told us stories about them.
The government, they are hiding, because the worst thing would be admit to not knowing, because this is a UAP or UFO. It might be a strategic move.
There are lots of classified UFO encounters. It's kind of embarrassing, and yet the government doesn't want that to be known. From 1948, people are saying disclosure is imminent. The government is about to reveal what it knows about these flying saucers. Disclosure is just around the corner, but I don't think it's actually true.
When it comes to aliens, if they exist, they sure are subtle. Mick, great to have you on.
Glad to be here.
So I've followed your stuff and your work for a very long time, and but maybe the audience here, maybe they haven't. So to those who don't know about Mick West, who is Mick West?
Sure. Well, right now, I'm someone who investigates strange claims like conspiracy theories and specifically UFOs. My background, though, is that I'm a former video game programmer. I worked on the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series of video games back in the late 90s, 2000s.
Yeah. I remember those.
Yeah, they were quite popular at the time. They're still popular now. There's some new versions of them coming out, which are essentially the same games that I made like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun. After that, I transitioned into writing. I did some technical writing, and then kind of transitioned to kind of blogging about conspiracy theories, and started out with a few things like chemtrails and things like that, and eventually moved on to other things, and I've kind of settled on UFOs as being the thing that I'm most interested in, because I just really enjoy investigating UFOs.
Do you also, I have to ask, do you also enjoy the reactions that you get? Because there are something about the UFO guys that they're very engaged, and I think some people at least have I think accused you of trolling them.
Well, there's a wide variety of reactions that I get from people, and yes, I do enjoy some of them, the more constructive ones. But UFOs is a very passionate subject. There's a lot of people who have very strong beliefs about what is going on. And there's also a lot of people who have had their own personal experiences. They believe that they've actually seen a UFO, or even had an encounter with one, or an encounter with aliens or something like that. So their belief in what they think they saw is solid. And when I come along and I say things like, that video doesn't show UFO or whatever, then they think that as being an attack on their entire fabric of their reality.
Yeah.
And so they can't imagine why I'd be doing that, because from their perspective, they know that it's true. They know it's true because they've seen something.
Yeah.
At least they think they've seen something. So they know it's true. So they know that I must be lying, or that I must be a government agent or something. And so they get a very negative reaction to what I say, and I get some pushback from those people. But I try to remain calm and just communicate effectively with people. And for the most part, people are very nice.
Yeah. Are you kind of likening the UFO crowd to religious people? Because it's the way you describe it right there, it sounds to me very much the same as if you were to try to talk a Christian person out of their religion.
Well, there's, in any like strange subject, or a subject that has esoteric aspects like this, there's always a range of beliefs. And there's some people who are just what we call the nuts and bolts aspects of UFO. They're people who just believe that there's some strange craft flying around and we don't know exactly what it is and we should try to figure out what it is. And then there's people who are a lot more spiritual, and they view the experiences that they have and what other people have as being almost like religious. Like it's and some of them explicitly say that. There's a guy in America called Chris Bledsoe, who wrote a book called UFO of God. And he basically equates his experiences, which is him going into his backyard and seeing various lights in the sky, which are usually things like the International Space Station or Venus or things like that. He interprets that as being messages from God or something similar. And then you get people, there's a crossover between what aliens are and what God is, and they view aliens as a messenger of God, or perhaps God as being an alien, and you get that kind of crossover as well. But yeah, there's definitely aspects of it. There's aspects of religion, and there's also aspects of cult like behavior. There are some people whose belief is so strong, and the way they follow certain people within the movement unquestioningly, and the way they operate and phrase things kind of reminds me of cults sometimes. But just to be clear, that's not everyone.
No.
Most people in the UFO community are just straightforward people who have, either seen some videos and been convinced by them, or they have had an experience themselves and they've been convinced by it. Or sometimes they've done a lot of research and they've read a lot of the historical narratives around these things. And there's lots of compelling testimony from people from the past, and it's easy to see how you could get convinced by it.
Yeah.
So just because there's a few people who exhibit cult-like behavior or excessively spiritual, it doesn't mean the rest of them are. You got to treat people as individuals.
Yeah, of course. And I think you do that brilliantly on your platforms, and people should go and follow you on X. Especially, I know you're a prolific Xer, if that's what they call it these days. But I feel like the fringe people, like the people who are likening aliens to religion and God, I don't feel like they are the masses. To me, the masses are the curious souls, and I call them maybe like the Rogan crowd, where I think that they see this phenomena and they are, how should I put it in a nice way? But they sometimes they don't follow Occam's razor. They want it to be more complicated than probably it is. And I feel like what you are doing is maybe pointing out that sometimes the simplest and most straightforward reason is the right one. Yeah,
that's an interesting thing there with Occam's razor. It's commonly said to be like, the simplest explanation is the most likely correct one. The simplest explanation is the best. In its original form, it was more like the explanation that introduces the fewest new things is probably the best. The law of parsimony, the way of explaining something without having to invent something else that you then have to explain.
Yeah.
And people don't really understand that as such. And it's not like a law of nature, Occam's razor. It's just a useful tool that we have for investigating things. But a lot of people, they see things like angels as being the simplest explanation.
Yeah.
Because if you already have a belief in angels, and then you see a light in the sky that's following in you, and then you don't walk into a lamppost or something like that. For you as an individual, not you personally, but for that individual, that can be the simplest explanation. So that they're actually using Occam's razor in that sense. But what they don't realize is that they're introducing a new entity. They're introducing this angel. And now you have to explain angels and everything that goes on behind that. And with UFOs, it's the same thing. You might think, here's a weird sighting by a military pilot. Military pilots are highly trained, and they should be able to figure things out, and they couldn't, and it wasn't. They didn't figure out what it was by the radar. So the simplest explanation must be that it was something beyond our technology. Mm-hmm. So that sounds like it's simple. The simple explanation is it's aliens or time travelers or something like that. And the complicated explanation is that there's a series of mistakes and failures of the pilot and perhaps the equipment and some strange coincidences that happened. That seems more complicated. Yeah. Then you just say aliens is a lot less complicated, but it's really not, because behind aliens there's the whole reality of, there's an alien civilization that exists somewhere else in the universe, and they've decided to travel here or through time or from the center of the earth or from another dimension or whatever. And you've got to explain all that. So you're not really using Occam's razor. It just sounds simpler.
Yeah. And also, I think it's a fear of simply being able to say, I don't know. I think too many people, they cannot simply say, I don't know. They need an answer. They need an explanation. And I think that's a very human thing.
Yeah. Some people disagree with that, though, because some people, they try to frame it as if I don't know is the answer. And so they say, Mick, how do you explain this? And I say, well, it's maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. But, oh, well, really, you don't know.
Yeah.
And then this kind of introduces the argument, which we call the God of the gaps.
Yeah.
Where it was an old argument used by religious fundamentalists, young Earth creationists, and they say there's certain gaps in evolution that we can't explain. We can't explain how there's a transition between certain forms because we have an incomplete fossil record and things like that. Yeah. And so they say, well, that's evidence that there's God because there's gaps in our evidence. And then people kind of use that with UFOs. They say, because we can't fully explain, say, the gimbal video, that must mean that it's aliens. It's this kind of you're filling in the gap,
yeah.
But the only thing you can think of to fill in the gap is aliens or some kind of weird advanced technology, when there's probably a bunch of more mundane things that would actually fill in the gap, much like just regular evolution probably fills in all of the gaps in our fossil record.
Yeah. And also the fact that as science are filling in the gaps, we then okay, but you cannot explain this gap, so this has to be God or this has to be aliens. So we kind of just put. And you had a term, I don't exactly remember how you said it, but you said it so well that what I'm trying. You have this amazing phrase. It's like every time we in history, before we used to, when we didn't have cameras, then we could then aliens were much more prevalent, or more things could be explained by being trolls or aliens or whatever. But as kind of our science has progressed, we've gotten more modern equipment. Then we just push the you have some brilliant phrase for this.
It's the low information zone.
Yeah.
That's what I call it. It's the region at which you just can't tell what something is, or the set of circumstances. With UFOs, usually you can't tell what something is, either because it's too far away, or your camera isn't powerful enough, the zoom on your camera isn't far enough, which is a similar type of thing, or it's too dark, or it's moving too fast, so you can't tell exactly what it is, you get some motion blur. But they only exist in this low information zone. Yeah. And if you get a better camera, then if there's something there that's unknown, which is just a mundane object, it gets resolved into that. You're able to figure it out. You get your binoculars out and you see, oh, that's just a bird. Yeah. You get your powerful zoom lens on your camera and you see that it's this thing that looked like a cigar is actually just a plane lit by the sun. And whenever things come out of the low information zone, they historically have always been resolved into something boring, something mundane. Maybe not always boring, but just something ordinary, something human. And the things that don't get resolved because we get a super close picture of them and we can't figure out what it is because it's this amazing craft. They don't get resolved because we get highly detailed radar tracks showing that they're doing amazing maneuvers. They don't get resolved because they're still in the low information zone. Yeah. And if you get more powerful cameras, it just pushes that zone further back.
Exactly. That is the way to put it. And the reason why I wanted to have you on is that it seems to me that there's so much going on in the US. Of course, there's Trump and you have all this crazy stuff, but within the UFO, UAP community, or whatever you want to call it, there's a lot going on. In the last 10 years, it seems like you have all these different whistleblowers popping out of the woodworks. Who are they? Are they legit? You are a skeptic, but it's very hard, I guess, even for you to I think it's proven without a doubt that these people have actually worked in the Pentagon. And I thought maybe to kind of structure this, maybe I can put out some names of these whistleblowers. The first one and the latest one that I heard of was this David Grusch. Who is David Grusch or Grusch? Or...
Yeah, he's not actually the latest one. The latest one is a guy called Jake Barber.
Yeah, yes.
But David Grusch is kind of like a pivotal figure in the UFO community, and he's a guy who worked, I believe, at the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, and the NGA, the National Geospatial Agency. Basically, he was doing like analysis of various things and a bunch of different jobs, and he had a fairly high level of clearance. And at one point, he got recruited to be like the liaison between the NGA and the UAP task force, which at the time was a body set up essentially by Congress. Like Congress passed a law saying that we had to investigate UFOs now, and so they set up this UAP task force, and he got recruited to be on it. And
when was this?
There still are.
When in time were we when they decided to launch this task force?
This would have been, I'm not sure exactly. I think it was like around 2018.
Okay.
2019, something like that. It was after the point in history where the modern era starts is 2017. The end of 2017, start of 2018, and that's when there was a story in the New York Times which kind of revealed the existence of a program that the government had for studying UFOs. I mean, it wasn't really a particularly good program or anything like that, but it was something that was funded by the government. And then over the years, various other people have come forward. I think I might have the dates wrong with Grusch. Like he was working, I believe, back in 2018, 2019. He didn't come forward until 2003 or 4, I think.
Yeah,
it's been over a year now. And so he said that he had talked to a lot of people who have told him that there is a secret crash retrieval program that basically that he interpreted as being. And people told him that we had crashed alien spaceships or craft that fly around in the Earth's atmosphere, and even bodies, you call them biologics, I think, of alien beings or biological machines of some sort. And he's convinced of it. He hadn't actually seen any direct evidence of this himself, but he talked to a lot of people who said that they had, and I think they showed him some documents. And this is kind of a key point. This is kind of a common theme with all these whistleblowers, except perhaps Barber, who's a separate case, is that they don't really have very much in the way of actual evidence themselves. They're basing their belief on what most people in ufology base their belief, which is talking to other people. And this is something that's been a consistent thing through history. Like I was just watching a video yesterday from the 1970s, and it was an interview with a former general. I can't remember his name right now, but he basically was saying, he hasn't seen a UFO, but he's talked to a lot of people who have told him that it's real. And so this was in the 1970s, so we're talking like 50 years ago. And you can go back even further than that. You can go back to the 50s. You get the same thing. You get people who say they believe in UFOs because other people have told them things. And what it seems to be is almost like this kind of circular conversation that's echoing back through the years. They're saying, oh, well, this admiral or this general said that it's real. But this general is only saying it's real because other people have told him compelling things that sound real to him. Yeah. And this is happening now. Like we've got the modern, equivalent of someone telling interesting stories is Commander David Fravor from the Nimitz case. Now, he's not a whistleblower. He's just a pilot who saw something weird and has been telling this story for many years, and he's a very compelling figure. So people like David Grusch, they talk to people like David Fravor. David Fravor says, I saw this amazing thing, very compelling story. David Grusch is like, oh, well, that's amazing. And that kind of tallies with what other people have told me. They've told me that other people have told them that there's a secret crash retrievals program. But Grusch came out over a year ago. Yeah. And we've really gone nowhere since. There's been no real process in terms of actual production of evidence. So I think he believes what he's saying, but I don't think it's actually true.
No, because the special thing with Grusch was probably that he had this congressional hearing. Is that
yeah, he had it, and there was him, and there was David Fravor was there, and there was another pilot there, Ryan Graves. Yeah, all together. But I forgot what I was going to rephrase now. Like, I think he believes what he's saying, but I don't think that it's entirely accurate. I think that he is saying some things which are true. Like he's saying all the things that people have told him things, and he's saying that people told him things. That is true. Mm-hmm. But what they told him might not be accurate. Now, people have told him that there's a secret crash retrieval program of alien craft. That might actually be true, in the sense that there's a secret program that was set up in the 60s, say, to recover what people thought back then were actually alien craft. The question is, were there actually any alien craft, or is there just a program? You know, in the US, there was a program that was designed to develop psychic powers in soldiers. And this was made into a film a few years ago, and there was a book called Men Who Stare at Goats. Mm-hmm. And this is actually based on a true story. You know, the US government the military actually spent money and time and effort on trying to develop psychic powers in some of its soldiers. And it failed because there's no scientific basis for that. Mm. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was, in fact, some kind of program in the past to try to recover a crashed alien craft. You know, we have people in the government who believe all kinds of strange things.
Yeah, and what you're alluding to there is that there are actually real conspiracies, and I guess that's what's fueling the conspiracy theorists. But it seems strange to me that like someone has to lie here. Either is this David Grusch guy, or it's someone who is lying to him. But why would they lie to him? Like, what's their gain? And that is my biggest issue with most conspiracy theories. Also, this one is why would they keep it secret? Like, what is their incentive to keep it secret?
Yeah, that's you bring up a point there. Like, are there people lying? Like, that's kind of the question. Like, there are obviously people saying things that are not true, but that's not the same as people lying. Because if someone believes something to be true, then it's not actually a lie, it's just a mistake. So if you've got a bunch of people who honestly believe these things and they're telling them to other people, everything that Grusch says could be based on honesty. It could all be based on things that people have honestly believe and they tell him, and then he's just honestly relating that to us. It doesn't necessarily mean that anybody along that chain is lying. It doesn't rule it out. It's entirely possible that people are lying, or they're just making stuff up for fun, or there's some kind of disinformation program going on to distract from something else. Those things are possible. But just because something is false, it doesn't mean necessarily that someone is lying.
No. And it might be the case of a fisherman talking about the fish he caught, and then he tells it to his friend, and his friend talks about his friend's fish, and then eventually the fish is like an alien fish. And it's
totally. You get things like that. You see it in the media. Like someone writes a story about something, that story gets repackaged into another site which is less good at fact checking, and they put a certain headline on it. Someone different who writes the headline from who writes the story, and then the next person who copies that story basically takes the headline as fact and then incorporates the headline into the body of the story, and then the story just grows in the retelling. Yeah, and that can happen, with individuals telling stories, especially over a long period of time. You get somebody saying like, I saw some lights in the sky, and they kind of maybe were triangular shaped, and then 10 years later, that story, by repeated retelling, becomes the 20 people saw a football field-sized triangular craft hovering over a nuclear power station, just because it gets embellished with time. You got to go back to the actual source to see what was actually going on, and oftentimes you can't do that. So all we're left with are these stories being recycled over and over again.
But I guess the second thing that is compelling with Grusch's story is that it kind of harmonized with the old story from Bob Lazar, who claims to have been working on Area 51, where they had these bodies and where they actually did retrieve spacecrafts.
Yeah, but it's not exactly like it's an independent corroboration of the story. This is basically UFO mythology that everybody in the UFO culture has belief in to one degree or another. All the people who are really into UFOs think that the government has more knowledge than they say they do, and they all think that a good proportion of them think that we have recovered alien technology. A lot of them think that a lot of the developments in science over the last 70 years actually come from repurposing alien technology. There's a metal called nylidol, something like that. It's a memory metal that returns back into its shape after it's bent. Oh. My wife actually has a bit of it in her heart because it's something that's very, it works very well for that particular thing, like closing holes in hearts. Yeah. And people think that came from Roswell. So there's lots of people who have these deep set beliefs, and it's part of this kind of mythology. And what Grusch was repeating was basically mythology. He told a story about a UFO that crashed in Magenta, Italy in the 1930s. Late 1930s, I think, and then was recovered by the Americans, the OSS, which is a precursor to the CIA, after World War II, with the help of the Pope and the Vatican. It's this kind of this wild, crazy story, but it's become part of UFO mythology, and he's just basically repeating that. So when he repeats Bob Lazar's stories, he's just repeating UFO mythology. It's not as if he's actually seen these things. He's heard the same stories. Yeah.
And with the fact that he claims to have been hearing those from inside the government is fascinating, at least. So either he is lying or somebody has been lying to him, or there's something there. I guess that's...
No, I don't think so. I disagree. I think we could easily get to the state we're in now with people just making honest mistakes. People thinking certain things and then retelling the same stories. I don't think it's necessary to say people are either lying or there's something there. That sets up a false dichotomy, and that false dichotomy kind of leads people to there's something there thing, because people generally don't lie. Most people don't make things up, and most of the people we're talking about come across as being reasonably honest. Yeah. So I don't think David Grusch is lying, and I don't know what proportion of the things that have been told to him are lies. So I think you can't underestimate the amount of self-delusion that people are going to have when they're just basically hearing stories and repeating stories. Delusion is probably the wrong word, but like deception, like belief in things without evidence. Yeah. People like to believe that what people tell other people, what people tell them, is true. And I think David Grusch believes these other people are telling him the truth. And if they're not, that doesn't mean that they're lying. They're just in the same boat as him. They're just one step further down the chain. Yeah. A chain of stories that goes all the way back to Roswell.
And slightly get altered from what could have been a weather balloon that we found strange, then turn into something alien maybe, and then it's definitely alien, and then I guess that's how it goes. But what about Luis Elizondo?
Elizondo, he's the person who was the subject of the New York Times story in December 2017, I think. And he was someone who worked at a program called ORSAP, and which was this program set up. It's quite an interesting background to it, and the background to it really wasn't discussed in the New York Times story, and kind of gets skipped over a lot by journalists. And really, it goes back to a guy called Robert Bigelow, who's a Las Vegas real estate developer, a rich guy, multimillionaire. And he's been very interested in UFOs for a while, and he heard about a ranch where apparently like people were seeing things, UFOs and ghosts and things like that, and werewolves from other dimensions.
Skinwalker
so he bought
Ranch.
This ranch, Skinwalker Ranch. So he bought Skinwalker Ranch, which is in Utah, and set up a team of scientists to try to study what was going on there. Funded it himself. He paid for people to go there. And he was looking for anomalous things, and he really wanted to find them. And I think he actually gave bonuses to people if they found anomalous things. So there are stories where people would basically make stuff up just so they would get the bonus. But over the time, like he he was still convinced that there was something going on. And one of his friends was Senator Harry Reid, who was one of the senator for the state of Nevada. So he's a U.S. senator, pretty high up. Eventually became like the leader of the Senate, and maybe the leader of the House. Can't remember now. But anyway, he was very, very high up politician, and he was invited to go to these UFO meetings with another guy who was there, George Knapp, who was a journalist in Las Vegas. And,
the guy who broke
so
the Bob Lazar story, right? That's George Knapp.
Yeah. So it all kind of ties together. It's a limited number of people involved in this story, and there's lots of connections you can draw between them. So George Knapp takes Harry Reid to these meetings, which were organized by Robert Bigelow, and Harry Reid gets kind of drawn into the culture. He becomes a believer specifically because compelling people are telling him stories. And he says this himself. He wrote a piece in the New York Times. I think he's passed away now, but before he wrote a piece saying he was amazed by what people were saying. So you got these compelling people telling these compelling stories. Mm-hmm. People like Jacques Vallée, who's very well known in the UFO community, and Hal Puthoff, who's someone who researches alternative technology. Harry Reid gets convinced, and then they eventually come around to setting up this research program. There's another guy, actually a Pentagon rocket scientist called Lakatsky, who visited Skinwalker Ranch, I think at the behest of Bigelow and Harry Reid, and he had some weird encounter. He saw these tubular bells hanging in the kitchen, like just levitating in the kitchen, like as if they come from another portal, from another dimension or something. And so he gets convinced that there's something going on, and then they all work together to set up this government-funded research program, basically to study strange goings on at Skinwalker Ranch. But they disguise it. They don't say that that's what they're doing. They're saying that what they're doing is studying advanced aerospace technology, the future of how planes will fly and weapons in air and space. But what they're actually doing is studying stuff like poltergeists and UFOs at Skinwalker Ranch. So that's the program ORSAP. Yeah. And at some point, Luis Elizondo gets brought in to run security or something like that in that, and then he eventually becomes a little bit higher up in there, and he claims that he took over another program called ATIP, which was kind of the informal successor to that program. But basically the whole thing, the whole roots of the government's interest in UFO investigation has been this paranormal ranch, Skinwalker Ranch, and these people who have these weird beliefs in the paranormal.
But doesn't that also prove the point that a lot of these UFO enthusiasts have, that the government, they are hiding? There's stuff going on funded by the government that the president he doesn't know about it because it's hidden in the budgets. It's hidden like as you mentioned here. We're studying aerial, the future of aerial crafts, but what we really do are studying poltergeists. So doesn't that kind of also prove a point that they're making?
Well, yeah. I mean, we already know that. Though we know that there are programs that are secret, they're compartmentalized, and they're on a need-to-know basis. So unless the president needs to know, like they're not going to tell him every single thing that's going on. There's probably hundreds or maybe even thousands of these programs that are so compartmentalized that they're not going to brief the president on everything. And something like searching for poltergeists at Skinwalker Ranch, if it was true, would be earth-shattering. But it's probably not. So they thought, like, why were we going to tell the president about this one? There are secrets in the government, and there are probably some secrets that the president doesn't know about. But he could, if he really wanted to, he could go and find out. He has that power. But that's the thing, though. Like, how do we know that there are secret programs about aliens? We don't. We just know that people have told us stories about them. Yeah. Sure, it's possible that there's some kind of secret program by some kind of deep state military or something like running these programs, But why are we believing this in the first place? We're believing it because we've heard compelling stories from people like David Grusch, who's heard compelling stories from other people. We don't actually have any evidence that any of this actually exists, and we certainly don't have any evidence that aliens are involved.
Yeah. What are Luis Elizondo's claims?
I believe his claims are that the government actually has evidence of alien visitors, like that we have crashed craft. He's a lot more cagey about what he says than Grusch. He's a lot more reluctant to give details. Grusch is pretty reluctant as well, but he thinks that we're not alone. But you got to look at it from who is Elizondo as a person. Elizondo is someone with a strong belief in the supernatural. He believes that he can do what's called remote viewing. He believes that he can cast his consciousness thousands of miles away and view things that exist in another place. He said this in his book. He gave an account about how he got together with 3 other remote viewers, and they basically psychically tortured a terrorist in another country, thousands of miles away.
Yeah, that's
made
strange.
his bed shake. No, made it seem like his bed shake, and they appeared to him as angels. And this is something that he believes to be true. Yeah. He believes that he
how would he know
and his
though?
family
Has he spoken with his terrorist after?
He said that he heard reports of from other people because he's an intelligence guy. He used to he was deeply involved with Guantanamo Bay, and he says he was known as the torture czar, like the guy who was in charge of all the torture at Guantanamo Bay. He doesn't give any details about what he actually did there, but he says he's Europe has a warrant out for his arrest because of his involvement with torture. But I don't think he doesn't give any details of that. He says that what he did was based on patriotism and defending the country, but he doesn't say what he actually did. But he does say that Europe has a warrant out for his arrest for his violation of human rights from their perspective.
Who is Europe though? The EU or he doesn't specify?
I guess it's the European Court of Human Rights would probably be the people who would do that. And then he claims that he has seen supernatural orbs in his house and his family house. Like he's be watching TV and he'll see these basketball-sized green orbs floating around his house. Yeah. And he never thought to take photos of them. He never set up cameras, but apparently he went on like once a week for a year these orbs appearing in his house.
On schedule,
Not on schedule, just randomly they would appear. But if you got a camera in your house, like a security camera, you would be able to catch them on this camera. He says that they were so common that his neighbors would remark upon them when they were having barbecues. That, oh, look, there's some orbs in the sky. He never thought to investigate it, really.
Again.
Yeah, it seems ridiculous. And so this is a guy that, he's got a background in the intelligence community. He worked at Guantanamo Bay, like in the torture department, and he has all these really weird supernatural beliefs. And so now he comes out and says, like, oh, I think that these stories that people have been saying are real. But why are we going to believe him? It seems like he's got a propensity for believing weird things, and it doesn't really seem like he has a very critical nature and in investigating things. If I had orbs appearing in my house like every day or every week, I would be moving heaven and earth to figure out what it was. Like, what is this? Have I discovered ball lightning? Am I being haunted by ghosts or something? And this isn't stuff I'm making up. This is in his book. You can read his book and you can see all of these things that I just described. The remote viewing, the torturing, the orbs in the house. It's all in his book. He says it all himself, and I was very surprised to read it. It's like it doesn't reflect very well upon him. If he's just stuck to the nuts and bolts of it, it would have been much more compelling. But
I agree,
it's not a good look for him.
I agree. But something that is fascinating to me is that something that makes them very compelling is that every time and I think also this David Grusch, every time they talk on podcasts and stuff, they always say that I cannot answer this question because I cannot, like, I'm not allowed. So this thing, like, I can talk about all of these things, but when you ask, I don't know, sometimes it doesn't even make sense to me. Like, why is this off the table?
Yeah,
But you can talk about this.
Yeah, no, it's like, is that real? I mean, there's a number of possible explanations. I mean, one is just that it simply butts up against some actual classified thing. Like they can't talk about their sources or whatever it is. And there's lots of classified material. There are lots of classified UFO encounters. I know, like Arrow, for example, which is the current Pentagon body that investigates UFOs. They've got hundreds of cases of UFOs, and they can't talk about them. So we get these little snapshots every 6 months or so. They'll release one new case with their case resolution report. But behind the scenes, there's hundreds and hundreds of cases of UFOs, which they just can't talk about because everything is classified by default.
Yeah.
It's not like we can't talk about things in the military because there are amazing things that would reveal, like, the existence of aliens or some advanced technology. They're not saying that. They're just saying, like, well, that's just got default classification. It was taken with a camera where everything that's taken with this camera is classified by default. Or it's there's another thing, like I think was it confidential, unclassified information, where it's not classified, but you're still not allowed to talk about it. So just because they can't talk about something, it doesn't mean it's interesting.
Yeah.
It just means it falls into this huge bucket of things that you're not allowed to talk about if you're in the military or the intelligence community.
Yeah. And yeah, no, it's which I guess it makes sense though for the government to classify stuff and keep it secret, because the worst thing for the U.S. government would be if they admitted that they didn't know, like this is a UAP or UFO, and then the Chinese are just sitting there like, ching ching, we know something, like, this is ours and you don't know about it. That would be the worst things. They cannot kind of admit to not knowing, because it might be an unstrategic move.
Yeah, and that's kind of like at the bottom level of the spectrum of possible conspiracy theories. Like you've got, like, angels and demons at one end, and at the other end is just simply, the government can't figure out everything that pilots are reporting, which is the simplest thing, and they don't want to admit it.
Yeah,
which is like a really low level conspiracy theory, but it's probably the thing that's closest to the truth. The cases that even the cases that Arrow publicizes, they're not super complicated. They should be able to figure them out. And I think, like, there's perhaps a little bit of embarrassment that, especially back from the early days of the UAP task force, where they would, they'd be giving briefings to Congress on things. There's this one case called the Green Triangle, which was reported originally as being like triangular-shaped craft hovering over a ship, and they have video of it. And the UAP task force took this as an example of an actual a UAS, an unmanned aerial system. They didn't go out and say it was a UFO, but they said here's an example of something, and they took these 3 slides, 3 images on one slide, and they showed these little green triangles. It turns out that these green triangles were just out of focus stars. And they're not only were they just out of focus stars, but we have video of a guy, like, holding up the camera and talking. Is focusing on these 3 stars and saying, we have visual of 3 unidentified aerial systems hovering like 800 feet above the ship. So you got this, and there were stars. There were verifiably stars. We actually matched up the star patterns and everything. Just matches exactly perfectly, 100%. There's no question that what they were actually filming were actually stars. And yet, the UAP task force went to Congress with this slide and said, here's an example of these flying craft. So, back in the day, maybe not with Arrow so much now, but certainly previously, there's been big mistakes that were made, and it's kind of embarrassing. And the government does not want that to be known. Yeah. That we have the person who was filming it was what's called the Snoopy team lead. Snoopy is like an acronym for something, but it's basically the people whose sole responsibility is to film things from the ship and to figure out what they are. And this was the team leader, the leader of the Snoopy team, on this big military destroyer, like Navy destroyer. And he couldn't figure out what it was, and he accidentally filmed some stars, and he thought that they were drones.
Yeah.
So that's not the type of thing you want to publicize.
Have you been contacted by the government?
I talked to people who've worked like on this type of thing, but I'm not sure what contacted by the government would look like. I suppose no would be the simple answer there.
Have they come to you, because you are obviously good at this? And if I were the government, I would be like, who do we know who are an expert on this? And Mick West should be a name that should pop up in people's mind.
I think that there's the reluctance to talk to civilians because I don't really have qualifications as such. I'm very good at what I do, but if someone had to justify why they would be talking to me, it's kind of difficult. One thing I do is I develop software. I used to be a video game programmer, so I've been using that to develop software to analyze UFOs. And that's been in the works for a while, and I've been working with people that I can't talk about to improve that software. So
now you're playing the same game, so you cannot talk about this because
it's it's very straightforward.
Because it's classified information, or is because
it's just that they don't want that
they don't want to be
asked me to do so. They don't want to be identified, so it's a confidentiality thing. It's not like I have these big secrets, and it's not really very interesting who it actually is. It's just the people who are involved with it don't want to be named.
But they're just government people that are currently associated with the government.
Well, I can't talk about who it is, but what they're paying me to do is just improve the tool that I wrote. So it's called SITREC, Situation Recreation, and it's a tool for basically analyzing UFO footage and recreating it in 3 dimensions, and then figuring out what's going on. And it's fairly sophisticated, and it can be used for all kinds of things. And I know that a lot of the cases that the government has would be solvable by using this tool, so anyone can use it. And so I think that's kind of one way that they can actually use the public's involvement. They're not going to get me in to look at UFO cases because they're all classified, but they could, if they wanted to, they could use my tool.
Yeah, but I guess what is a civilian? That's someone who's not associated with the military yet.
Well, it's someone who doesn't have classification.
Yeah, but that just they could. But I don't know how this works. But I would guess that they could
complicated.
Give you some training. But I understand, and also the fact that
I'd like to get it.
Yeah,
to get clearance, you actually need to have someone who hires you sponsor that clearance, and no one's coming forward to sponsor me, which might tell you something about who I'm talking to. But I'm not being. I don't have that clearance. I'm not likely to get that clearance, and so they can't use me for their classified investigations. Directly. And all this stuff is classified. Arrow, all they're doing is classified stuff.
Yeah,
it's the stuff they release has to go through a process of declassification.
Yeah. And the fact that you're a public person is what makes it difficult, because then someone has to go out and sponsor a very public person, which will make this thing public, and then it would probably not cost benefit analysis would say that. Computer says no.
Yeah, I don't know. They've got other public people doing analysis, like people at NASA. There's a guy called Josh Semeta who did some analysis of the Go Fast video. He's a public person, but yeah, I don't know. I'd like to work on classified UFO cases. It would be amazing.
So you would actually want to do this. So this is like an open invitation. If somebody from the U.S. government are listening to this, they should give you a call, and you would be happy to help them out, because.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Especially I don't know, if they have. hidden information about some of the more public cases, like the gimbal case. But I don't think they do. They probably don't actually have anything. But it would be. But the problem is, like, if I go and start investigating things for the government, then I can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I like talking about the things I investigate. So I'm not sure how useful it would be in the long run.
You mentioned
useful to the government.
just quickly, like the gimbal video, and you have this go fast video. What do you believe that these things are? Because you obviously don't believe that they are alien spacecrafts.
Yeah, I don't know what they are. I don't think they're aliens because they're not really doing anything amazing. The gimbal looks like it's a craft that's like 30 miles away and it's moving away at a certain angle. People disagree with that because it's, for one thing, it looks weird. It looks like a rotating flying saucer, but I think that's been fairly well demonstrated that that's just kind of an artifact of the camera. It's this glare in the camera because it rotates the same amount as would be required by the camera moving by the angles that we see on the screen. So everything matches for it being a rotating glare, even though some people will disagree. But we also have like a verbal account, secondhand verbal account of what happened from the pilots, and they say it was much closer than that. And if it was much closer, it would be moving in a really weird kind of vertical J pattern, which doesn't really make any sense. So I think probably that one, gimbal, is probably a distant aircraft. Don't know for sure. It's not entirely clear. You can't really. It's still in the low information zone.
Yeah.
Go fast has been analyzed multiple times by multiple people. Neversoft did it. Neversoft, that's my old video game company. Metabunk.
Yeah.
Metabunk did it back in when it came out in 2018. And we determined that it's not going very fast. It looks like it's going very fast, but that's just parallax. Yeah. NASA did the same analysis. They determined that it's not going very fast. It's just parallax. Now, Arrow just released their analysis, even more detailed than NASA's analysis. They incorporated the wind correctly, and they said it's not going very fast. It's basically similar to wind speed, or maybe a little bit faster than wind speed. So something like a balloon or a bird.
Okay.
So I think it's probably something like a balloon or a bird. It demonstrated nothing interesting.
Okay.
But then again, we've got this conflict between the video and the verbal accounts, which are all secondhand. They're all secondhand, coming from this one guy, Ryan Graves, who knows the pilots who took it, and he's relating what they're saying. But now it's years later, and the story's changing. Like all of a sudden, they've remembered that it was part of a formation, something that they've not said for the last 10 years or so, 8 years or so. So we've got hard data and we've got stories, and I tend to go with the hard data.
Yeah, and Elon Musk has a nice quote on when it comes to aliens. He says something like, "If they exist, they sure are subtle." So, and this is a guy who I would think that NASA and SpaceX, they would have to know if aliens do exist, right?
Yeah, because it's a collision hazard for one thing, and the idea is that we have this alien technology. If we have alien technology, why is SpaceX still using these chemical rockets?
Yeah.
If we've got anti-gravity, why aren't we using this alien technology to help in Ukraine back when we were on Ukraine's side, or help Russia now? It's because the technology doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Or some people will say, like, we have crashed flying saucers, but they're too hard to reverse engineer. But even then, we should know about them. There's no point doing all this investment in the space industry if we have this amazing technology. And Elon Musk probably has a fairly high level of clearance now, and he says that he doesn't know anything about any such things, and he's one of the people who probably would know.
Yeah,
he could be lying, but probably not.
Just the last people here that I've had on my list: Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer. He's been in this space for years, and he has made a bunch of documentaries. He's a very compelling guy, and he really pushes his doctorate, the doctor title. What's up with him?
I think he's one of the people who's most like a cult leader. He's a very compelling guy. Like if you think about all the great cult leaders of the past, like David Koresh, for example, they're very well spoken. They're very compelling, and they start out seeming very innocuous. They're being very, very positive about things. Stephen Greer is still pretty innocuous. All he does is say that there are aliens visiting us, but he charges money for his retreats where people pay to see lights in the sky. Essentially, he's very compelling sounding. He speaks very, very well about the topic and is pretty knowledgeable about it. And you can see, like, if you don't know that much about it and you don't know much about him, it would be very easy for him to sway you to his side. By just simply talking about it and saying the things that he's seen or heard. But again, we've got stories and we've got hard evidence, and he really doesn't have any hard evidence. He's got a bunch of stories, and he's got his show essentially where he summons things by meditating, which is just basically you go out into a field. Especially probably where he does it is probably like a military base nearby or something like that, where there's planes taking off in a certain pattern. And you get people all hyped up, and then they start seeing lights in the sky, and they start thinking that they're some kind of aliens. And that's it. And that's all Stephen Greer really has. Loads of stories and some very soft evidence.
Yeah. And he's also on that, he's doing something that I feel like a lot of these people are doing, that they're always alluring that something is coming, like within the year or two now we will have all these people will come out and they will talk about it, or we will show you the real evidence because I've talked to someone and now we will get, and it never happens. It never comes to fruition. It's like the Mayan calendar. It's like and the cult leaders who have been saying that the world is going to end just next year.
And that's the thing in cults, like the millennial cults. The world didn't end in the millennium. It didn't end in 2012. It didn't end in any of the dates that people predicted. And people, either the cult kind of fails at that point, or they just pivot and say, oh, well, we did such a great job that they pushed it back a few years.
Yeah.
This is just
we did some wrong calculations.
Very, very common thing in cults, and people make jokes about it. Stephen Greer, he does come across as a bit of a cult leader to me. I think because he's so well spoken, and because of the pretty outrageous things that he says, like he claims that have people who have seen alien bases on the moon and things like that. None of it ever comes to fruition. None of it's actually real evidence. It's just people telling stories.
Yeah.
And you've got billions of people in the world. Some of them are going to tell interesting stories.
You mentioned earlier, we have to end with this guy, Jake Barber. Who is Jake Barber? I haven't heard of him.
Jake Barber is a former military guy. He was like a helicopter mechanic, and he says that he was recruited as a child to be in this special military program, which I think had to do with remote viewing.
Okay.
And there were other people that were involved as well. And this is kind of a little bit of UFO mythology, is that the government recruits kids out of school to be part of their advanced studies program, people who can do remote viewing or have psychic powers and things like that. And he's made a couple of interesting claims, one of which is that he, as a helicopter pilot, he helped recover a giant egg-shaped craft. And he has an account of it. And he talked to this journalist. I kind of hesitate to call him a journalist now because he's not really doing journalism. Ross Coulthart, who was just basically a UFO promoter at this point.
Yeah.
And he says the story is not very believable. Like he says that he was carrying this giant egg and he felt this wave of love go over him, and then later on he and his group were able to summon egg-shaped craft by putting on these special helmets that they use and using their psychic powers to summon things. And as evidence, he had a video of a white dot, which could be anything in the sky. Again, it's like really interesting stories, but we don't have evidence. There was video of an egg-shaped thing being recovered by a helicopter, but it wasn't taken by Jake Barber. It was something that was anonymously sent in to Ross Coulthart by someone else unknown. So it could just be like just some fake or something completely unrelated. And Jake Barber he's kind of teamed up with this rich guy, millionaire, maybe a billionaire, I'm not sure. Like, I can't remember his name now. Clocus, I think, perhaps. He runs the SALT talks, which is a conference, not the old SALT nuclear talks, the SALT talk conference. And then they hang out at a place called Esalen, which is this basically a hippie retreat where people go and learn how to meditate, and they have classes on summoning aliens, summoning UFOs, basically. So there's this whole woo kind of psychic thing going on, and Barber talks a good talk, but again, he hasn't actually produced any evidence. They're making TV shows or YouTube shows where they say they're going to summon these craft and demonstrate that they're real. Hasn't happened yet. Be great if it does, but not holding my breath.
So they're going to telepathically summon alien aircrafts.
Exactly, yeah. Not just telepathically summon them, and then telepathically take control of the aliens' craft.
Yeah.
This is what they've claimed they've already done.
Okay,
on a regular
they claim
basis.
these are biological aliens who are in the
they're not
inside.
clear exactly what they are. I don't think they've said, but I would assume so. If they can telepathically control them, it'd be kind of tricky to telepathically control a computer, but who knows?
Isn't that
using your quantum powers?
Yeah, but isn't also that the biggest argument against these retrieval, like biological retrieval programs? To me, it sounds so unlikely. Like if we humankind in the year 2025 were to go to another planet, we would never go with our biological selves. We would have sent a drone.
No, exactly.
We even sent drones to Ukraine. Why would we send ourselves to Mars or to different solar systems?
No, and some people say that the biologics, and the reason they use the word biologics is that they're actually biological robots.
But still,
which also doesn't really make sense. I mean, why would you use biological robots when regular robots are just so much better? Like,
exactly.
Yeah, sure. Like right now, certain things like muscles and things like that work a little bit better with the biological version. But I really don't think a super advanced alien civilization is going to be using this kind of stopgap technology of wiring cockroaches together to make robots. They're going to use actual robots.
Yeah, most likely. This has been great, Mick. And this final question: like, where do you think this will go? Where will it end? And I guess you've also seen and you also feel this. The hype is greater than ever. Where do you think we are in 5 years, in 10 years?
Well, I hope there's some revelation as to what's actually going on behind David Grusch's claims. It would be really good if we could actually figure out what he's talking about and what these secret programs actually are, and what's going on there. But what I see happening is a continuation of what's been happening for the last 80 years. Luis Elizondo's book. When I first saw the title of Luis Elizondo's book, it's called Imminent. I thought it was a joke, because imminent is exactly what people have been saying about UFO disclosure since 1948. Yeah, the year of Roswell. Yeah, 1947 was the year Kenneth Arnold saw flying saucers, which weren't even saucer shaped. And ever since then, you can see stories like from 1948. Yeah. Where people are saying, disclosure is imminent, essentially, in those words. Like the government is about to reveal what it knows about these flying saucers. And every year since then, it's happened. And now we've got a book from Luis Elizondo saying disclosure is imminent. There's a new film coming out by Steven Spielberg that's about how disclosure is just around the corner. There's a documentary that's going to be premiered about the South by Southwest conference I think it's in Austin or somewhere like that. Yeah. In the Southwest, where it's called something like the coming disclosure. It's all these promises of things that are just about to happen. They're the same promises that we've had for the last 70, 80 years. So I think we're just going to have shifts in what people are claiming. Maybe some interesting stuff will come out, but it won't be aliens. And then the can will be kicked further down the road, and we'll be in the same position now. Same position in 5 years' time that we were 5 years ago and that we were 50 years ago.
Yeah. It's interesting, but it seems like you will not be out of I guess we can call it a job, although I guess you're not making a lot of money from this specifically, but I think that you will have stuff to to cover on your X.
Well, even if the government disclosed that aliens were visiting us, it's not going to stop UFO sightings. In fact, there'll be like 100 times as many UFO sightings if the government said that, because everyone will be going out and looking at the sky. It's like what happened with the drone sightings in New Jersey. There weren't any drone invasions.
Has that been proven now that it was just planes or something else?
If you look at the actual evidence that we have, every single case where we have the date, the time, and the location, and the direction they're looking in, every single one of them resolved into being a plane. And in the ones that didn't, we didn't have that information. No. So it's like, what's the average here? The average is that every time something comes out of the low information zone, we can tell it's a plane. In terms of when we don't have it, you can often see by looking at it that it's just a plane, and then the other stuff is just lights in the sky and then stories. So it was a great illustration of how people can fool themselves. Yeah. There's still Facebook groups now where every day people are posting pictures of planes and saying this is a drone, and other people are saying, yeah, that's a drone. Some people say that's just a plane, but there's still like this feedback loop of people saying the same thing over and over again, and it's going to be the same with UFOs going forward.
I think I saw some statistics on this, that every time there's a new Hollywood blockbuster movie or something coming out with an alien theme, the UFO sightings spike.
Yeah, it's hard to measure that exactly. Like, if you look at like Google Trends, you can look at searches for UFOs, but they tend to like go around like TV shows and news rather than the films that much. There were spikes, I think, around when Men in Black came out. Yeah. And there were spikes with the X-Files. I did do a little bit of research of this in my book. I think I have a graph in my book.
Yeah, maybe that's where I have it from.
That shows these spikes.
Maybe that's where I have it from. Your book, I've actually read your book. It's a while back. Talk about your book, by the way. Where can people find that one?
Yeah, well, they can find it in online, I guess. Anywhere that books are sold online. It's called Escaping the Rabbit Hole. There's two versions of it. You got to be careful you get the right one. Actually, there's a bunch of versions. There's a Japanese version, and then there's a Chinese version as well. It's kind of fun.
Nice. Yeah, bring them forward. Let us see. And all right. So, what's the book about again?
So the book is how to talk to people who believe in conspiracy theories, like if you have a friend or relative. This is the original version of the book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracies Using Fact Logic. Don't buy this one.
Okay.
This is the wrong one. You should buy this one here, which is the newer one. It's much thicker, and it's got this dropboard on the front, and it says UFOs right here. So this is the only one that actually has stuff about UFOs in it. And if you happen to be Chinese or Japanese, this is the Chinese one, Chinese or Japanese, you can buy one of those as well. It was translated into both Chinese and Japanese, which is rather surprising. It wasn't translated into French or German or anything like that, but the Chinese and the Japanese apparently are interested in this type of thing.
Yeah, I guess they have UFOs there as well. No, but Mick,
yeah, I think I did do a little graph in there somewhere, but of the trends in UFOs, and there were definitely spikes around those times. I can't find it right now, but it
just proves that most likely, and I think that I probably show my cards here. I tend to agree with you. I think that I'm at least highly skeptical, but I'm a curious soul, so that's why I'm intrigued. I'm just as much of a sucker as everybody else, I guess, but I tend to be skeptical, and to me, it's what you said about the low information zone. That's what's the most compelling argument, is that it always seems that UFOs exist in the low information zone, and every time we push the low information zone further, further forward, call it whatever you want, then there's no UFOs there anymore. So
well, you can think of it as like we kind of did a big experiment over the last, say, 30 years. Like 30 years ago, how many people were carrying a camera around with them? Very few. And, they were quite selective about what they would take pictures of. And the cameras weren't very good. And, video cameras were terrible 30 years ago. And you fast forward to now, let's say you wanted to try to figure out, are there actually UFOs? Let's say you've got unlimited funds. What do? Well, we'll give everybody in the entire world a camera that they carry with them 24 hours a day. And this camera is capable of taking like 4K video at 30 frames per second. And it's got pretty good low light behavior, and it's got like a reasonable zoom. And they can carry this all the time. If there's UFOs, we're bound to catch one. So they give these cameras to, 4 billion people. And no one gets a good video of a UFO. So that's a clue, I think.
Yeah, that's a clue. It's a nice way to end this. Thank you so much for your time, Mick. It will be fun. Maybe we'll have you on in the future if David Grusch, if we get some more information on him, then we can revisit this.
I hope so. I hope something happens.
Okay, great to see you.
Okay, thank
Joe.
you.
Ciao, ciao.